Okay, I'm going to try this again. So I'm going to move kind of quickly through this and kind of explain what I'm doing the best I can. So here's the paint bucket. I'm going to try to get this into Unreal. So I'm going to go to File, Export. I'm just going to overwrite this file, but just pretend that I'm creating a new file. Click Yes, keep everything as default, and just click OK. And then I'm going to open Unreal. And I'm going to click Launch, and this shows the latest version that I have installed. And I'm going to create a new project. And you come down here and use a template. And I always choose the architecture, engineering, and construction. And click Next, and choose blank. And where it says with starter content, just keep that enabled, and then you want to enable ray tracing here. And then here's the location it wants to put it. That's fine, and I'll call this test 3. Create. Okay. So you saw how everything started really bright and then faded down to dark, and that's the auto exposure. And I'm going to go ahead and turn that off. And also, the middle mouse pan is reverse of what we're used to because it's kind of meant for gaming. So I'm going to change both of those. I go to Edit, Editor Preferences, and search for Invert middle mouse pan. Check that. Now everything pans the way I expected. And then I'm going to go to Edit, Project Settings, and search for Auto Exposure. Uncheck that. Cool. Good deal. And I am going to create a new level. And I just want a blank level. And I haven't really figured out how to give this a name other than going to File, Save Current As. And now I can give it a name. And I'm going to call this Paint Bucket Level. And every level is like a scene in your project. That's kind of how I set it up. Click Save. And now I've got my level, as you can see in the World Outliner. It's called Paint Bucket Level. So now in my content browser, I'm going to create a new folder. Call this Paint Bucket Asset. No spaces in anything in Unreal. And I'm going to import it. I'm going to go to my exports and bring it in. Keep everything as default if you want the skeletal mesh. This will bring in all of your geometry as kind of one piece, which is very useful if you don't need the individual pieces of geometry, which you might, if you're going to be animating nuts and bolts and things moving around, then you want everything separated. But I don't need that for what I'm trying to accomplish. So I just want everything as one. I'll just click Import. Cool. And now I'll just drop it into my shot. There it is. And I'm going to come over to my lights and drop it in HDRI backdrop. Boop. There it is. So now I have basic setup with my paint bucket and my HDRI. But this isn't the kind of HDRI I want because I want this to be an indoor scene. So I'm going to come back to my content folder, which is, the root directory where everything can sit. And I'll create a new folder. I'll call this HDRIs, and I'll just bring in a few. And I have some indoor HDRIs. I'll bring those in, take a look at them. Cool. And I am going to try out a different one. So I have my HDRI selected. So here's my, in the world outliner, I've got my paint bucket and my HDRI. Got my HDRI selected. You see down here in the details panel, it's my, I can move the HDRI, I can rotate it here. But here's my material. And I'm going to put on a new material. So I'm going to take it from my directory and I'm going to drag it right on. Here we go. And I'm going to adjust. If I grab this projection center right here, I can kind of adjust it so it's not all stretched in a weird way. It doesn't really matter. I'm just using it for lighting. And I'm going to put a tabletop, but I can make an adjustment. Now, if I want, I'm not crazy about this one. This isn't really the kind of HDRI lighting I want. I'm going to try a different one. This time I'm going to apply it a different way. I'm going to just take it, this one right here, and I'm just going to drag it right onto my HDRI. That didn't work. Boop, that didn't work either. Oh well, I drag it right under there. I guess you can't drag it onto HDRIs. Maybe you can only drag it onto geometry that way. I'm not sure. Anyhow, that's one way to do it. And another way to do it is you can just have it selected. Have your HDRI selected, have your map selected, and you can click this little button right here. Use selected asset from content browser. Boop, and that's another way to apply it. And if you happen to be, if you have your object selected in your scene and you want to quickly find your map, you can just come down here to this little browse button and it'll highlight your map so you can edit it real quickly. Okay, so I like this HDRI better. Let's have a look at it. Looking good. So the first thing I notice is that I've got this lens flare, which is cool. It's kind of automatically turns on, but I want to control that. I don't want it to be on while I'm setting up my shot. I might want it later, but so what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up here and I'm going to do a search for post process volume. I'm going to set this in my shot. This controls all the effects and adjustments and rendering features in my shot. And by default, it only affects what's inside of the volume. And I'm going to make it so it affects everything in the shot regardless of where the volume is. So with the volume selected, I'm going to come over here, search for infinite, and check infinite, extend, unbound. Go ahead and check that. And now I'm going to do a search for flare. I'm going to check intensity so I can affect it and then zero that out. And that turned off my lens flare. Cool. So this is looking good so far for lighting. It's nice even lighting. I might take my HDRI and just drop it down a tad. Oh yeah, and everything is kind of snapping. When I try to move things, they're kind of snapping, kind of clicking into place. And I'm going to turn that off right here. So now I can move things smoothly. It's not snapping to a grid or anything. Okay. Yeah. So I've got my HDRI selected, and you can see I have intensity right here, and I can adjust that 0 to however hugely bright I want to make it. I'm going to set it to like maybe 0.25 for now, because I'm going to put another light in. You can see there's like a real subtle shadow being casted from this light source in this map over here, and I'm going to try to put a light there because I want to accentuate that lighting. So I'm going to drop a rectangle light into my shot. There we go. I'm going to rotate it so it kind of matches that location, and you can see where the shadow's falling. That looks like a good spot right there. I'm going to change this to local axis so I can move it on its local axis. I'm going to move it up a little bit. Looks like a pretty good spot for it. I'm going to increase the attenuation a lot and the intensity. Cool. And the size. Looks pretty nice. I'm going to move it back a little bit. I really just want to get a nice reflection on my surface. I'm going to put a table in here at some point. I want to get a nice reflection going, and this is going to help me achieve that. Okay. Good deal. And just to see, so I can see what it's doing, I'm just going to highlight my HDRI and just zero it. And now you can kind of see how the light is affecting my scene. Make a couple more adjustments here. Okay. That looks pretty good. And I can turn my HDRI back on to see how everything looks. That looks pretty good. Good lighting. For now, it should work. Okay. So now I've got my HDRI. Just for the sake of organization, if you get a bunch of stuff in here, you can just create a folder. And I'm going to call this lighting. And I'm going to put my lights in there. And I always like to keep my post-process volume in there as well. You can also just right-click and click Move To, and you can choose your folder. That's another way to move stuff. Okay. So now I've got everything in my lighting folder. I'm going to create a tabletop kind of surface. So I'm going to come up to Basic, and just create a plane, drop it in. There we go. Move down a smidge and just scale it up. There we go. Move my HDRI down a tad so it's not competing with this geometry. There we go. All right. Looking pretty good. Might come back to my HDRI and just lower the intensity a little bit. Cool, that looks pretty good. I think we're off to a good start. I'm going to put a surface material on this tabletop, maybe something kind of reflective. So I'm going to come back to my content directory and just create a new material. I'm going to call this M table, and I'm going to apply it. And I'm going to open my material. Double click it, it brings this up. Okay, and this is my material, and I'm going to want some maps for this. So I'm gonna go find some maps. Going to import maps, and I don't know. Let me just see what I have. Old plywood, that looks pretty cool. Maybe I'll try that one. No idea what this is going to look like. And I'm going to drag it, drop it into my material editor, and just connect it to base color. Click apply. Hey, that looks kind of cool for the shot. I think I saw a normal map in there as well. Go ahead and bring that in. Drag it in. And I'm going to connect it to normal. Click apply. Cool, that looks pretty good. You can already see it's slightly reflective, and I can adjust that, and I'll kind of show you how that works. So I'm going to hold down 1 and left click to create a constant, an expression constant. I'm going to drag that to specular, crank it up to 1, and I'm going to do the same thing again, another constant, and pin that to roughness, leave it at 0, click apply. Now you can see I have a very reflective, it looks too reflective, kind of wet. So I may need to adjust that with my roughness. I might change that to like 0.5. I want it to be a little reflective. Yeah, that's not bad. Yeah, that's pretty good. Now, if I wanted to change this material, and this may not be the one that I want, there's a couple different ways I can do that. I'll go ahead and import some more materials. I'm going to try like a concrete. And I have a bunch of concretes, but I got one recently that I used when I was creating the shot. Is it this one? Or is it this one? Maybe it's this one. I'm going to go ahead and bring in the diffuse, which is called albedo. Megascans material, they call it albedo. And I'm going to bring in the roughness and the normal map. And that's all I need, I think. I could bring in displacement, but I'm not going to do that. Cool. So what I'm going to do is kind of show you how I can replace, quickly replace materials. So if I grab my diffuse, I can just select that, and you see what it's pointing to. I'm going to go ahead and highlight the diffuse map that I want to swap it with, and I'm going to click this little button right here, and that just swapped it. I'm going to do the same thing with my normal map. Swap it. And I have a roughness map now, so I can get rid of, I'm just going to try it like this, see what it looks like. looks pretty good. Now if I want to use a map for roughness, I can just drag it in. And I'll Alt click the line to separate it, and I'll drag a line to roughness. Click apply and save. And save kind of makes the material kind of permanent. Otherwise, when you close this out, it'll say, do you want to save, or your changes will be lost and you want to save. Okay, cool. Looks pretty good. If I want to tile it, the whole thing, I can do that. I'll show you how to do that. So let me just delete this. I don't need this anymore. So if I want to tile it, I need to tile all three maps. So this is what I'll do. I'll right click over here and start typing texture coordinate, and there it is, texture coordinate. And I'm going to go ahead and tie this to the UV slot on all my maps. And now with this selected, I can choose, I have some tiling options. I'm going to choose like maybe 3, just see what that looks like. Click apply. That's pretty cool. Looks pretty nice. I think that'll work. Cool, so we're off to a good start. We've got some basic lighting set up, and it's probably a good time to go into the post-process volume and just change some settings. So I'm going to come down to the rendering tab, drop down. You see you've got exposure and bloom and all kinds of things you can do, dirt mask, but the one I'm interested in is rendering, because I want to change some render settings. Rendering features, here we go. And I'm going to choose, let's see here, I'm going to turn on my ambient occlusion, and I am going to turn on ray tracing ambient occlusion. Good. And I'm going to increase the samples to 4. And let's see, I want global illumination turned on, so nothing is turned on by default. Everything has to be turned on. So I'm going to come to ray tracing global illumination. I'm going to turn that on. Where it says disabled, I'm going to enable final gather. You see how that changed the shot a little bit? Created some bounce light. That's good. All good. Let's see. Motion blur, I can turn that on, but I don't need to right now. And there's one more thing I want to do, which is reflections. I want to turn on ray tracing reflections. That's good. And under ray tracing reflections, max roughness, I want to change this to 1. And all that does is it caps out how blurry the reflections can be, but I don't want any cap on that. My system can handle that value. And I'm going to change the samples right now to 4, but I'll show you how you can do that, a quick and easy way to increase the samples and everything in your shot later. Shadows, hard shadows, that's fine. Translucency, I don't have any translucency right now, so I don't have to worry about that. Okay, cool. So I got some things set up for a nice looking render, and it looks pretty good. So far, so good. Probably need to bring my tabletop up just a smidge. There we go. Okay. Yeah, I'm pretty happy with how this is looking so far. So now I'm ready to look at my paint bucket. And you'll see that I have several materials under my paint bucket. One of these is my paint, and I want to give my paint a new shader, and I'm going to go ahead and do that. I think it's this one, Material 25. So I'm going to double click that. And right now it came over with just a diffuse color. I'm going to delete that so I can show you how to create that yourself. So if you hold the number 3 key and left click, that's how you create a color. And then you can attach that to your base color. And let me just click apply to make sure I'm affecting the right thing. Nope, that's affecting something else. Must be this one. Yep. Okay, so that's my paint color. I was pretty happy. You know, the paint color needs to be this kind of like army green, so I'm going to go ahead and change that. Looks pretty good. And paint is pretty reflective, so I'm going to go ahead and give it a specular value. Just remember I'm holding the 1 key to create a constant. And I want it to be very glossy, so I'm going to leave this at 0 for now and just see how that looks. That might be like a little too reflective, maybe 0.35. Yeah, looks pretty good. Maybe that's a little too saturated. Go ahead and lower the saturation a little bit. Maybe shift it a little bit towards brown. Pretty good. Save and close. Okay. Off to a good start. Let's see. Oh yeah, this is what I was affecting the first time, the lid, and I'm going to go ahead and change that to that same color. Yeah, pretty good. Cool. Off to a good start. All right, let's see. So I've got my paint bucket selected. I'm going to hold Alt and drag. So I'm going to create a few instances of this. And I'm going to rotate them, just kind of stagger them a little bit so they're not all exactly the same, I guess. So if I don't like something about the shot, and one thing I realized with the shot as I brought it in is that it comes with a lid, and I don't necessarily want the lid. So what I might do, I'm going to try something real quick. I'm going to come back to my content folder, and this might not work, but I'm going to give it a shot. And I'm going to come to my paint bucket skeletal mesh. And okay, I'm going to try something. So say I want to get rid of the lid. I could delete it, or I could just select the thing that I do want to be in the file. Go to File, Export, Export Selected, and I'm going to call this Paint Bucket. No lid. Save. Click OK. And I'm going to right click this file, re-import with new file, and I'm going to choose Paint Bucket No Lid. there's my lids. Cool. Okay. I'm just going to quickly just stagger a bunch of these around. Yeah, something like that. That's pretty cool. Yeah, and the inside of the can, I'm going to change that material. And I have a material built for that already, actually. Need to go bring that in. Let me see if I can find it. Is it this one? I think it's this one. It might not be it. This one? No. Ah, there it is. Okay. Yeah, that works. Okay, cool. I think this is a good start. Um, so, I'm going to go ahead and make my tabletop a little bigger. Scale that up a tad. All right, I'm going to drop a camera in now. It's probably a good time to do that. So I'm going to come up to Cinematic here, and I'm going to grab the Cinecant camera actor and drop that in. And you see the camera view right here. I'm going to change. So I want the camera to be looking basically where I'm looking right now in the perspective view. So I could just move the camera around like this, but I like to snap it to my current view, kind of like Control C in 3ds Max. So I'm going to right click my camera and I'm going to choose Snap Object to View. And now I'm going to go to my camera view. Right now I'm in perspective. Change this to camera. There. And I'm going to kind of adjust it until I get the look I want. That looks pretty good. And since we work in anamorphic, I'm going to go ahead and make some changes to get us there. So I have the camera selected. I'm going to go ahead and move that to my lighting folder. I like to have everything that has to do with cameras and lights and effects just in my lighting folder. So there's the camera. Let's look at some settings for it. So anamorphic I've figured out is 35 sensor width by 15. There we go. Cool. And for focus settings, I'm going to go ahead and create some depth of field. So I'm going to click Draw Debug Focus Plane. And I'm going to start to spin the manual focus distance until I can see it moving. It's this pink thing. And I'm going to put the focus where I want it. So I kind of want the focus to be maybe like on the middle can. Looks pretty cool. About like that. And I'm going to turn it off. And then I'm going to increase my depth of field real quick. So you can do that with f-stop. I'm going to, where it says minimum f-stop, I'm going to choose 0.5, and for max, I'm going to choose 0.5 as well. There. And now you can see the depth of field nice and clearly. Looking pretty good. Make that a little stronger. Yeah, there we go. I like that look. And by default, the viewport doesn't use high quality depth of field. So I'm going to do a console command to increase the depth of field quality. You do that, you hit the tilde key, and it brings up this little command prompt. And I'm going to start typing r dot temporal AA dot upsampling, and you'll see that it brings this up. I'm going to choose that, and I'm going to put a space after it and hit 0 and hit enter, and that just increases the quality of the viewport depth of field. Cool, that looks pretty good. I think we're ready to set up a animation now. So under cinematics, I'm going to choose that. I'm going to choose add level sequence. I'm going to call this paint buckets sequence. And that brings up my sequencer. Good deal. And I'm going to take my camera and drop it in. And now I have, when I do that, it creates a camera cut, and that says that I'm going to be using this camera. You can see Cine Camera 1, and that's the camera it's going to be using. I could put several in here and kind of do like a little edit, but this is the one I want. And anything I want to animate, I have to drop into this sequencer. So yeah, it looks like I'm ready to rock. So I'm going to move the camera slightly. So I'm going to create under transform, I'm going to create a keyframe. And I'm going to check this create a key when when properties change. So it'll automatically create a key when I move the camera. And I'm going to come to the end of the sequence here. And I'm going to move the camera slightly. There. It's pretty subtle. Just a little camera movement. That's it. Right now it's easing in. The movement is easing in and easing out. I'm going to change that. I'm going to drag a marquee around my keys, and I'm going to right click, and I'm going to choose linear. Cool. I'm going to close that. And I'm going to change my viewport real quickly. Go up to perspective and choose cinematic viewport. And then I have to go back and choose my camera again. So anytime I want to, it's important to remember now that if I try to move around inside of this view that I'm going to be changing my camera. If I want to just look at things, I need to kind of launch eject from the camera, which is this button right here. Boop, and now I'm in perspective mode, and I can do whatever I need to do to my scene, and then I can come back to my camera like this. Okay. Cool. So one thing, you see that it says lighting needs to be rebuilt. That's because of the kind of light I'm using. If I change this to movable light, then that goes away. This one gives you, movable does great. It does great lighting. But if you need it to be very, very, very accurate, then you probably want to use stationary light and just click build. And it'll go through and build your lights for you, and it'll do a really good job of kind of baking the lighting into the shot. I'd say it's a little bit more accurate than the dynamic movable lights. There we go. Okay, so I've got my cinematic. Got my subtle camera movement. Everything looks good. And I'm ready to render. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to go to Window, Cinematics, Movie Render Queue. And under this Movie Render Queue, I'm going to come over here to this green button that says Render. And I'm going to choose my sequence, Paint level, Buckets level. I'm going to choose that. And under Settings, I'm going to click here. JPEG sequence is fine. I could change that to PNG or EXR or BMP, whatever. If you need an alpha channel, you're going to want to use EXR or PNG, but JPEG is fine. And I'm going to put an anti-aliasing in here. And this is what's going to give you a nice high quality render. And I'm going to change, 1 is good, maybe 16 is good here. And just choose override. I'm going to override the anti-aliasing in the scene. All good. And there are a bunch of other things that I'll get to later. Under console variables, I can change all kinds of quality settings here. But we're just going to go with default for now. All looks good. Click accept. And oh yeah, I need to give it an output location. So I'm going to come down to output and click the 3 dotted lines. And I'm going to point it to tests. And say paint buckets. There we go. And it's going to use the sequence name and frame number, and that's fine. And 1920 by 1080, that's fine. Click accept and click render local. And now it's rendering. And you see with the settings that I chose, with the high quality depth of field and the anti-aliasing, it's going to take about 5 minutes to render the shot. I don't need the whole thing to render. I'm just going to, it's already done, 15 frames. Oh, I forgot something important actually. Hold on. Boop. Close this. Stop. I'm going to stop the render, bring my sequencer back. And this is supposed to be set to 24 frames per second. There we go. And there is another little trick that I found. For some reason, it'll do the first frame, and it'll mess up the first frame unless you grab this your camera cut, just drag it a little bit into the negative value, and then it'll render correctly. So, not that important, but your very first frame of your sequence is going to be messed up if you don't do that. Cool. And I'm just going to render again. And once it gets to 24 frames, I'll just stop it and yeah. This just gives you a little preview of what it's going to look like, but it's like it says, it's low quality, so it'll look better when it's rendered. Okay, 24 frames, done. So yeah, I'm going to go look at those real quick. Yeah, pretty happy. It looks pretty good. I did want to kind of show that there are some settings that you can do to increase the quality a little bit. Getting a little bit of flicker back here, which I'm not happy with. And, so one thing you can do is you can select your light, and then under the search details, just type sample, and I'm going to increase the samples per pixel to 4, and I'm going to keep sample typed here, and I'm just going to go to my post-process volume, and this brings up everything that also has a samples value, and 4 already set for all these. That's pretty good. And if I wanted to increase the anti-aliasing quality a little bit, I could do that. Change this to 32. I can even change this to 4. 4 and 32 is pretty good quality, but for the sake of time, it's probably good that I use kind of a lower quality. Okay, so that's the basics of rendering a shot in Unreal.